In his first cabinet meeting at the White House, President Trump is set to address critical global and domestic challenges. Elon Musk, despite not holding an official government role, is expected to attend, raising questions about the meeting's priorities. Key topics on the agenda include U.S. policy on escalating tensions in the Middle East, the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and pressing domestic issues. As the world watches, the alignment of cabinet members with President Trump's bold agenda will be tested on these pivotal matters. I'm Henny Saif, and this is Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
According to Politico, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is set to meet President Trump in Washington, bringing a surprise defense spending boost to secure Trump's support. Starmer has pledged to increase the UK's defense budget to 2.5% of the GDP by 2027, a move hailed as vital to maintain strong transatlantic ties, particularly with the US and on Ukraine. However, this plan was kept secret until the announcement, even from key allies, to maximize the impact. Despite positive reactions from US defense officials, Starmer's decision to cut foreign aid, reducing spending from 0.5% to 0.3% of the GDP, has sparked domestic and international criticism. Starmer's diplomatic mission also includes securing closer economic ties with the US, particularly in technology and trade. However, his success hinges on navigating Trump's unpredictability while pushing for stronger cooperation, especially against growing challenges from Russia and China. The Guardian has reported that the U.S. House narrowly passed the Trump-backed Republican spending bill with a vote of 217 to 215. The bill includes $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, increased defense and border security spending with a $2 trillion reduction in future spending. Republicans argue it supports the America First agenda, while Democrats condemn it as harmful to middle and low-income Americans, warning of Medicaid cuts. Elon Musk's cost-cutting efforts have sparked controversy, with staff resigning from his Department of Government Efficiency and federal workers facing pressure to justify their jobs. Musk will join Trump's first cabinet meeting, despite not being a cabinet member, to discuss waste reduction, The Guardian said. Meanwhile, Trump continues to support Musk, defending his efficiency initiatives, but questions arise over the actual savings from contract cuts, with nearly 40% failing to produce any budgetary benefits, according to The Guardian. As President Donald Trump convinces his first cabinet meeting, a bold and contentious agenda takes center stage, signaling a decisive shift in U.S. policy that promises to reshape global dynamics.
In his first meeting with ministers in the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to present a bold agenda that reflects his confrontational and often unconventional approach to governance. His cabinet has already undergone key reshuffles, with strategic appointments to sensitive and pivotal positions, signaling a shift in U.S. foreign policy and domestic priorities. Among the most anticipated issues are the Middle East and the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Additionally, Trump's appointment of staunchly conservative figures to key roles suggests that his evolving stance on the Russia-Ukrainian conflict and a harder line against Iran will continue to shape U.S. policy. Another major topic is Trump's controversial policy shifts, particularly his withdrawal from Paris Climate Agreement, a reassessment of foreign aid programs, and the pursuit of a new nuclear deal with Iran. His approach to global environmental commitments remains a focal point of debate. The presence of high-profile figures like Elon Musk, who has been invited to attend the cabinet meeting despite not holding an official position, further raises questions. Musk's influence in shaping policies may steer the administration's trajectory, especially regarding sustainability and innovation. Trump's administration is expected to push forward a contentious agenda, with the cabinet's ability to either align with or counterbalance his more controversial decisions playing a critical role in shaping U.S. governance and its global standing. It remains to be seen whether the administration's actions will provoke severe geopolitical ramifications or whether a more diplomatic approach will emerge in the coming phase.
And to shed more light on the most recent updates concerning Trump's first meeting with his cabinet at the White House, the most important issues that will be tackled and their implications, we're joined from Washington by Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center, and from Paris, Mr. Meher Nicholas, firstly Chair of the EU ASEAN Center and Director of the Washington Forum on Geoeconomics. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome to Think Tank. Mr. Russell, I'll start with you first now. What key foreign policy issues do you expect President Trump to prioritize during his first cabinet meeting, especially regarding the Middle East?
Well, I think that it's unclear what he's going to highlight. I mean, the first month and a few days of the Trump administration has been a Jackson Pollock painting of all kinds of directions that we've seen. There's been a lot of flip-flopping on certain policies. There's been a lot of strong talk that they've backed down from. So there's really no telling. Originally, the thought would be that there would be a focus on immigration. That's his key platform. The economy has got to be key on his platform. We're seeing increasing interest rates. The costs of staples such as eggs have skyrocketed. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on today's cabinet meeting on Trump and certain cabinet members, including Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Homeland Security.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Fursley, now considering the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, do you expect Trump's cabinet to be fully on board with his approach to settling the war without taking European security interests?
For short, the answer is yes, and there I'll disagree politely with my Washingtonian colleague for a simple reason. The second Trump White House is very different from the first one. So 8 years ago, when he entered the White House, he was a newcomer to Washington, D.C., and more importantly, half his cabinet, which is a lot, were people who were not on board with the sort of neo-realist Trump agenda. They were neoconservatives, people, who believe that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney are the right kind of Republican. And so they betrayed him, they stabbed him in the back. So for 4 years, with half his cabinet member and many national security and CIA high-ranking officials hostile to him, and Congress, back then, Republican Party 8 years ago was different kind of party. It was, a country club Republican, Bush-Cheney, neocon party. So all that changed. So today, it's a very, very different kind of Trump and a very different kind of cabinet. All his cabinet members are loyalists, especially Michael Waltz, who is the national security advisor, Tulsi Gabbard, who's a former Democrat. She's a Trump Democrat. And Tulsi now is the National Intelligence Director, including the CIA. So she oversees all intel agencies. So these guys, what's interesting, and what is the relationship to the Middle East? You have someone at NSA, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and the head of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. they both served in Iraq. So they both were actually active duty soldiers in Iraq when Bush and Cheney, with the backing of the Democrat Party, sent people illegally in Iraq to topple the regime based on using false pretext. And these people, that's why they support Trump. They want a completely different kind of foreign policy, especially in the Middle East and Russia. They want to move away from the failed policies of Biden, Clinton, George W. Bush. They want a new kind of foreign policy based on focusing solely and only on America's national interest. It's called neorealism. And of course, many people in Washington, D.C. don't like it because they're used to the old ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Russell, talking about foreign policy, how might Trump's new budget proposals, including the cuts to foreign aid, impact the U.S.'s global standing and relations?
Well, we're already starting to see that. Basically what the Trump foreign policy is going to do, and we're seeing this largely in Africa, we're starting to see this accumulate in Far East Asia and in Eastern Europe, is the Trump foreign policy is driving American allies and American key trading partners into the arms of our adversaries, that being China and Russia. When America makes it more difficult to trade, when America decides to get into this posture of America first, America only, this isolationism does not help global standing with the U.S. Part of, if you go back and I would argue that the best time where U.S. has demonstrated a strong global presence was during the time of James Baker, when he was Secretary of State in the Baker Doctrine. The reality is having soft power is what is going to really drive U.S. presence and establish that street credibility with the rest of the world. Donald Trump's foreign policy right now seems to take away from that soft power. This power through strength idea doesn't really match up to the new global realities that we're dealing with right now. So the bottom line here is, as we get into trading wars, as we get into tariffs, etc., the big problem is that this is going to have an adverse effect on the global economy, and that's going to further isolate unwillingly or involuntarily. That's going to isolate the U.S. from the rest of the world, particularly with our key partners. I mean, look, we're having a trade war possibly here between Canada and Mexico. If we're having one here in our own backyard, that does not bode well for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, the trade wars, speaking of them now, Mr. Fursley, how will the reshaping of the U.S. diplomacy under Trump influence these trade wars, the global trade in the coming years, especially with the new tariffs he imposed on key U.S. allies like Canada and the European Union?
Here I will disagree less with Dr. Russell, but I will do some nuancing, if you'll allow me to use a French word. I don't think that Trump is an isolationist. Once again, he's a neo-realist, and you could say his foreign policy and trade policy stance, of course, they are linked. They're based on the ideas of Theodore Roosevelt. So that's an ideology called in American English bull moose. So he's a bull moose centrist. What does it mean? Yes, he's fairly protectionist. So he doesn't believe in free trade. That is true. That is correct. But it doesn't mean he's isolationist. I would call him a radical pragmatist, which may sound cynical. And of course, what he's doing now with Ottawa and Mexico City, he's putting pressure on the Canadians and the Mexicans. I don't think that he wants a trade war with them. And quite frankly, Mexico and Canada are in no position to engage in a trade war with the US. They would lose immediately. So what he's doing now is pressuring them to get better terms of trade for America. It may work It may not work. There is some degree of risk involved. So Trump's, success is by no means guaranteed, but at least he's trying something new. Apart from that, another reason why he's not an isolationist is the previous administration. So let's look at, the Biden White House, Tony Blinken, Hillary Clinton. Let's look at George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and compare them to Trump. They were very hostile to Russia and to China, and they were also very hostile to the Modi nationalist government in India. So if you have a US government with people like George Bush or Joe Biden extremely hostile to India, China, and Russia, it's more than half of the world. So the idea that Hillary Clinton and Dick Cheney were, internationalist and nice, and Trump is a nationalist and an isolationist, that's a caricature. So I think what Trump is doing now is focusing on something called the fifth industrial revolution, which will be based on high-tech, artificial intelligence, rare earth minerals and metals, and the control of these gigantic, new Silk Road, energy and transportation infrastructures, giant ports, airports, canals. That's why he's focusing on the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. So all that is part of the fifth industrial revolution, which quite frankly is about a new Cold War pitting China against America. So it doesn't mean a hot war, but it means an acceleration of the Chinese-American rivalry across tech, high-tech, AI, transportation, energy. And to do that, Trump is very pragmatically looking at the world map. And if you look at the world map in a very cold manner, in a very rational way, Siberia is huge. If you don't have overland flight rights, if you cannot transport using high-speed rail over Siberia, if you cannot use the new Russian-controlled Arctic Sea shipping lanes, if you cannot get natural gas from Siberia and rare earth minerals from Sakhalin Island or Tomsk, you will lose that new Cold War with China. So I think what Trump realizes is Russia is no longer a superpower. Russia is no threat to America. Russia is like a mid-sized pivot nation. And in that new Cold War with China, you need to have on your side, or at least have them neutral, but preferably on your side, as many pivot nations as possible. So these are countries like Russia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
These are the new pivot nations of the new Cold War.
Mr. Russell, now going with your isolationist policies theory now, will Trump's America First approach lead to further isolationist policies? Are we seeing a new direction with stronger defense spending? And you've mentioned the use of soft power. Now, how might the use of soft power balance any isolation?
Soft power has always been effective, particularly when it comes to the U.S. I mean, let's be clear, with all due respect to my colleague in Paris, we start looking at Russia as not being an adversary, as being a pivot nation. That's highly incorrect. This is a country that is led by an individual who has made it a personal goal to reclaim the old Soviet Union power in Eastern Europe. This is why NATO allies such as Poland, the Baltic states, we've seen him do this in Georgia. We've seen him do it in Crimea. This is a complete underestimation of the threat that Vladimir Putin and the Russians pose to Western and U.S. national security. At the same time, to look at China as being, the only threat. Look, China is a huge economic threat to us, but the only thing that U.S. has that can prevent China true dominance. I mean, look, we're seeing it with China's Belt and Road program in places like Africa, Southeast Asia. It is a mafia-like financial plan, but that's all they've got because the U.S. has completely neglected the effectiveness of soft power in these regions. But the thing that the reason why I bring that up is because China and the US are in what I would call a mutually assured economic destruction. If you remember during the Cold War, during the nuclear arms race, the Soviets and the US had mutually assured destruction. One launched a nuclear missile at the other, they would fire back, the volley would continue. We're in global winter. There is an economic mutually assured destruction going on now between China and the US. The US economy is so dominantly reliant on the just-in-time logistics and the cheap products that come out of China, and our economy demands that. So when Americans are trying to buy $350 70-inch flat screen TVs from China, you increase that with a trade war, that's going to affect the economy here. People aren't going to be spending it on hard products. At the same time, China can't afford to get into this kind of economic mutually assured destruction, because if the Americans and the Western allies aren't buying cheap Chinese products, their economy is already taking a hit. It will take a deeper hit. From there, we see the ripple effects of the two largest economies on the globe in some sort of major escalation or some sort of destructive war. That's going to affect everybody. It affects Wall Street, it affects Canary Wharf, it affects Hong Kong, it affects Moscow, and all the global economic centers in the world. The US and China have to realize, and President Xi's a practical individual. He worked very closely. This idea that the US was hostile to China and India during the Bush years. As somebody who was directly involved or indirectly involved during those times, I can tell you there was very little hostility. There was a better dialogue between Beijing and Washington then when there was now. So make no mistake about it, this is a very delicate situation that the President Trump America First policy has put in. Do not conflate this as being anything but part of what benefits Trump. We have not seen anything that has demonstrated that this is in the global best interests.
Well, Mr. Fursley, if we are looking at how the US is trying to side with Russia, do you think that, keeping in mind with Starmer's defense strategy, do you think Starmer will be able to tempt Trump with his plan to boost this defense spending in order to prevent US rapprochement with Russia, which in order could affect the Chinese economic prowess?
The short answer is no, for many reasons. Of course, the White House is happy about the notion that finally the British and the French and the German are increasing a little bit their defense spending, which they were supposed to do 8, 9, 10 years ago, which they haven't done. So it's good, but they're playing catch up. So basically they will need to do it massively over a long period of time, not just 1 year, for them to catch up with the requisite level. That's the first thing. I think Trump's people have already decided the rapprochement with Russia. They strongly believe that Russia is no longer a superpower. Now, that is the American or Trump view. That is not the prevailing view in Berlin, Paris, and London. And of the three, I think the most hostile to that view is London. And of the three, the most dependent on Washington's goodwill is London. So even though they don't like Trump's policies, they will not challenge him because they cannot and they will not. So to make a long story short, Trump has decided, has calculated that based on that neo-realist perspective, very different from the Bush, Cheney, Clinton, Biden worldview, he has decided that Russia is no longer a threat or rival. Now, don't get me wrong, if you are Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland, yes, locally on the border with Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Russia is a problem. What Trump says, it is not our problem. So once again, he's extremely focused. He looks at the GDP. Today, Russia's GDP is 15% lower than Spain. So a country like that is no match for America, but it has a gigantic landmass. And in the new Cold War,
Yes.
for the fifth industrial revolution, having them either neutralized or on America's side will be essential if America wants to win the fifth industrial revolution.
That was Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center of Washington, and Mr. Meher Nicholas Ferdsley, Chair of the EU ASEAN Center. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your insights. As Trump's cabinet meeting sets the tone for his foreign and domestic policies, the world watches how these pivotal decisions will reshape global relations. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.